All right, I'll start now as we're still admitting some people, but I'd like to welcome everybody to today's webinar and thank you for taking the time to be here today. A couple of housekeeping rules or things that you should know. We will be taking questions, and if you'd like to pose a question, please pop it in the chat. If you just put your name and your state and your question throughout the webinar, I will when Jane pauses, I will ask her the question. So please ask questions as we go along. The slides and the transcript from today, or the recording from today, will be up on the ASA website after the event. So, and I'll share that on our socials. But I'm very pleased to welcome today Jane, who is based in WA. She's an experienced human resource practitioner who's been running her own business for nearly 20 years. She is currently employed at the Royal Agricultural Society of the Western Australia, as well as still continuing her consulting work on the side. She is a Chief People and Strategy Officer for the RAS of WA, and we're very pleased to have her experience today and thank her very much for her time in this particular space. So Jane, I'll leave it to you and thank you very much for your time today.
My absolute pleasure. Welcome everybody. This is a topic Katie and I were just talking about this offline, saying that it's not everyone's cup of tea, but it's very, very necessary. So I'm hoping we can, I'm just trying to share my screen at the moment. So as I just get this sorted, excuse me. Oh, it's loading. It's taking its time for some reason. But I'm happy to take questions, and there'll be things that perhaps I can't respond to. So if I can't answer straight away, then we'll come back to you. I'm having some joy already with the tech. Here we go. Bit slow. So hopefully people can see. I've got a thumbs up from Katie, which is great. Thank you. I did speak to my colleagues in a couple of the other royals around Australia and told them not to dial in. So I'm hoping they're not online. But what I am hoping is that those of you that have dialed in will learn something. I've run this session for our council. I've run this session for our staff, for some of the other affiliates in WA. But what I find is there's a common ground that we have, and certainly across Australia, there's some common ground that I hopefully I'm able to share. As Katie said, I work for the Royal Ag Society. I'm working here full time since probably about 2022. But what's interesting is I volunteered back in the late 90s for many years on the Young Rural Ambassador Committee after it changed from Miss Perth Showgirl, and that was certainly a very interesting time for me. So to come back some 20 odd years later as a staff member was something I'm very proud of, and it was a nice circle back moment to be part of a wonderful organisation. So hopefully we can get through some slides today. Katie and Heather will be managing questions, and I'm hopefully be able to answer some of those. Excuse the noise that you can hear in the background as people depart a meeting. Okay. Learning objectives for today. Really, I want to cover off the difference between psychosocial risks and hazards. I also want to try and dispel the myths about some of the things that we can do in our smaller ag shows and societies. Bit of a state-by-state snapshot, just looking at the commonalities as well. And I'm sure I've got a mix of paid and unpaid people as officers of their organisations. So we want to talk about your obligations under workplace health and safety. We're going to talk about psychosocial hazards and the impacts. And also one of my favourite topics is our brain's response to stress. So what are those things that make us fight or flight? We also want to finish off with talking about the minimising the risks of psychosocial hazards, but we will drill down and look at how our brain might respond to things. So this is a bit of a dual process, you as a committee member or you as a paid leader in the organisation, and as well as looking at you as an individual and how you can manage those stresses. So, what are psychosocial hazards? Hazards are workplace conditions that could cause psychological harm, but the risk is the likelihood and the severity of that harm. So they're both really important. Sometimes they're used interchangeably. According to Queensland's code, a psychosocial hazard arises from the design and management of work, a work environment, or even a workplace interaction. And before we started, Heather and Katie and I were talking about the pressures of showtime. We all understand that we have multiple volunteers working across our showgrounds at that time. And how do we manage that as a committee or as a board or as a leadership group? It is extremely difficult. So we do want to talk about how we make that environment safe, excuse me, and also allow people the opportunity to raise their concerns. So obviously the stakes are pretty high, and exposure to psychosocial hazards can, in severe cases, cause anxiety, depression, illness, even physical manifestations as well. So we don't want to look at the worst case scenario, but we do need to think about what our role is in managing those risks and at least mitigating as much as we can. So when I think of show-related demands, excessive job demands, inadequate support, bullying, those sorts of things can increase the likelihood of an impact and having someone come forward later with some issues. Obviously, the hazards can actually relate to an individual. So an individual might have different coping strategies. We all have different personalities and different experiences, but that also can have a huge impact. Why does it actually matter? I think what's important for us is to move from just ticking boxes into action. So obviously we have workplace health and safety obligations, but we need to think about what's meaningful for us and what's fit for purpose. If we're going to reduce or minimise risk, we need to think about what is doable in our workplaces, what's doable in our showground environments, and think about incremental change year on year in terms of improvements. So if we think of hazards as potential causes of harm, risks are more about the probability. But we don't want you throwing bucket loads of money or resources at every single thing. We need to think about what are the biggest risks and what are the things you need to manage. But psychosocial risk management is part of our obligation as officers of our organisation. So we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. So we want you to tailor your interventions accordingly. Think about what's the best way forward. State by state, despite the name differences, there's definitely commonalities. WA, for instance, adapted their code of practice from Safe Work New South Wales. And the principles in this presentation link us all across Australia. But I would advise you to look at your own state for any specific nuances. The model laws, I'm going to quote this, the Model Work and Safety, Health and Safety Regulations Division 11, Psychosocial Risk, was implemented by all jurisdictions in April 2022. So there is an overarching law that requires us to manage psychosocial risk and hazards in the workplace. I think it's important to think of our roles if you're a volunteer. Obviously, I'm trying not to do too much legal speak and I'm not a legal person, but you do need to know that a PCBU is a person conducting a business or undertaking. So whether you're a committee or a paid staff member, you have responsibilities under the WHS legislation. I also want to say that certainly in WA and the way we work, and I'm sure for all of you, a worker is defined as someone that is a paid employee, a contractor, a subcontractor, even labour hire employees, apprentices, interns, and most importantly, volunteers. So when you think about your responsibility to workers, it's not just for your paid staff, it's for your volunteer group as well. That's really, really important to think about. And that's you as a volunteer, but it's also the volunteers that work with you at showtime or throughout the year. So committee members need to support the organisation in meeting those obligations, WHS obligations, governance, oversight, consultation and risk management. Really, really important to think about our role as company directors or officers of the organisation. And when we've rolled this out with our board, we've made it very clear that they have a duty to exercise that due diligence and not walk past behaviours or risks or hazards or anything that they can actually address. Really, really important that they know their responsibilities. Bit of a screenshot here, but I think this is a really useful screenshot from due diligence requirements for company officers under the Work Health and Safety Act. So we've got reasonable steps that can be taken. We've got questions that should be answered by company officers and even possible methods of compliance. So I'd really suggest you have a look at that. And it's not written in too much legal speak. It's actually saying these are the things that need to be done, and these are the questions that you should be able to answer. And some of the methods, you know, you can tailor those fit for purpose, but it does give you compliance methods for each of the steps, which is really, really useful, I think. I think, and this is where our safety and risk manager helped me out with this, but I think most of you would be aware, and this is from Safe Work Australia, is managing psychosocial risks is just as important as managing physical risks. Tried to find a fairly simple graphic of this, but our role is to meet the duties to manage psychosocial hazards and risk factors as an employer or as a PCBU, and we need to eliminate or at least minimise the psychosocial risks as far as is reasonably practicable. I hate that word. So just to say that again, we might not be able to eliminate risks completely, but we can minimise those psychosocial risks as far as practicable. So it's our requirement under WHS regulations to use a risk management approach, which is what this simple graphic shows. It helps us identify and address the factors and systemic issues that might exist in a work environment. And I think we all have in our show environments very challenging situations with multiple people. I know certainly in our case, we have nearly 1,000 volunteers at Showtime, and many of you would have multiple hundreds or many volunteers on ground during show, and paid staff as well. So the risk management approach is a continual process. As you can see, it's a circular process and it's comprised of 4 steps. Step 1, identify the psychosocial hazards and risk factors. Step 2, assess the associated risks. The important one is, what are the control measures that you're putting in place to eliminate or at least minimise those risks? And in this cyclical process, the review of those control measures, that's your incremental change or continuous improvement year on year. What are you doing to review the effectiveness of those measures? We can't always get it right, but by putting things in place, you are actually showing your people and showing from a legislative point of view that you're actually addressing what is required to be addressed. And that's not just a once every 5 years. You do need to regularly review the effectiveness of those controls and adapt or improve them where necessary. The first step and the next part of the presentation is around identifying psychosocial hazards. I tried to pitch this presentation hopefully at the right level, and obviously for some it's probably it's hard to pitch it, but I just wanted to try and take this as fit for purpose for people in the ag show space as best we can. If we talk about what are some of the work-related psychosocial hazards, again, I'm trying to pick up those things that might be relevant to us in the show movement. Safe work identifies a massive range of hazards. What I'm giving you are probably ones that I think might hit the mark for you. You'll probably see a lot of things in common here. High job demands. We are all working at intense pressure and stress, potentially, at showtime. And I will talk a bit more about that, but stress can be extremely positive as well as negative. Poor support, one that's easily addressed, poor or no policies and procedures. That's my HR hat talking. Poor workplace relationships. And the workplace, for the purposes of the legislation, is not necessarily your showground. It could be a meeting place. It could be an online situation. So the workplace is anywhere where you conduct work, in inverted commas, whether you're a volunteer or a paid person. Other psychosocial hazards: lack of role clarity, violence and traumatic events, fatigue, and inappropriate or unreasonable behaviour. I think when stress levels are high, and I'm not picking on one, but I do think that the inappropriate and unreasonable behaviour is probably one that we can all relate to in terms of people's stress levels rising, people snapping at each other, whatever it might be, but that could also extend through to harassment or bullying, which is obviously not what we want from a workplace point of view. I highlighted some notes on my slides, and I didn't even look. I can't even see them now, so I'm going to have to refer to my paper versions. Sorry about that. Okay, so again, I don't want to bombard you with a list of hazards, but there is a massive list under the guise of psychosocial hazards that might be present. And some of these are probably more related to employees working in an environment rather than volunteers. So I've tried to pick the show-related ones for us to focus on. Psychosocial hazards can affect anyone. Certain groups might be at greater risk. So we do need to think about new workers, volunteers, workers that are in training. We took on 5 interns yesterday, so they're all starting at the same time, but they are effectively in training. Older workers, workers from culturally diverse backgrounds, and those with previous injury or trauma exposure. Now, when we manage our volunteers, we don't necessarily know what someone's been through before. So we do need to think about these things and perhaps create a forum where we can actually get to know our volunteers better and make sure that these things are covered and that we're paying attention to these higher risk groups. So impact on individuals: anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, sleep disorders, fears and phobias. And the physical effects could be anything from physical health problems or fatigue-related accidents. I think, again, I don't want to undermine what I've written, but I'd say many of us could probably relate to a lack of sleep when we're under stress. So impacts on individuals are one thing, but what does that mean when we come to work to volunteer with, lack of sleep or it can create incredible stress, but create safety risks as well in the workplace later on. From an organisation point of view, productivity can be reduced. We can have people absent, and we do notice for certainly at Showtime, our volunteer group, not so much our competition volunteers, but our service volunteers hit hump day halfway through show, and they're less likely to turn up. We can see a lower quality of work, and obviously workers' comp or insurance claims can follow as well. I mean, these are just really obvious examples, but we do need to think about the impact on individuals and the impact on our societies, our ag shows as well. And the pressure of someone being absent is pressure on somebody else to pick up the slack, which is not ideal. I sort of mentioned this before, and I don't want to make light of these stress indicators, but I bet most of us could tick off a couple of these things as we get closer to our shows. And I know a few people are online today that haven't experienced a show. Hopefully they're not feeling worried about it, but it really is about how we manage our own stress and what we're going to do for ourselves, but also support if we're a leader or heading up a committee. What are our stresses, but what do we need to look for in others, particularly if you're in a leadership role? So when you see people's anxieties increase, or we see people's tempers rising, we need to check in with them. We can't just assume, oh, well, it's showtime, we're all in the same boat, or they can't handle it. We do need to think about it. But look at those triggers in yourself. And when you start to see those behaviours, I remember reading many years ago about there are things that we can see in ourselves that others can't. So, you know, whether it's your heart racing or headaches or lack of sleep, those things aren't necessarily visible to others, but there are other things that are. So if you are irritable or snappy or showing those signs, there are signs that you can see in others, and there are signs that you can see within yourself. And it's being aware of those triggers, and not everybody has the same stress indicators. That's absolutely for sure. And you can see that when you look in others, when you can see someone shutting down, someone getting louder, or someone even avoiding you. That could be as simple as that. So thinking about fight and flight and freeze, I think about the reptilian brain. I call it lizard brain, but this is the word that I can never pronounce. The hypothalamus triggers our fight, flight, or freeze response. And I know the cartoon is probably suggesting someone, you know, putting up their getting aggressive, but fighting can be a very different thing. It can be shouting, it can be disagreeing. It doesn't have to be, you know, physical. But fight, flight, and freeze can be anything from a rush of adrenaline. It can be a suppression of the immune system, so people can actually get ill. And we notice that at Showtime for us, we get a big rush of people getting unwell because they might be burning the candle at both ends, or they might just, the stress does create that that result of not being as able to get over sickness. But again, as I said before, some of these things you can see within yourself, and some of them you can see in others as well. The most important thing is, under stress, our brains are less productive. So I always think about lizard brain, your brain shrinks. You've got less capacity to think, and you've got less capacity to think creatively. So problem solving becomes harder. A lot of people can shut down and avoid. So things that need to be solved aren't. People might avoid and walk away from a problem and not actually bring it to someone's attention. I think the important thing, whether you fight or flight or freeze, it doesn't matter which one, none of them are ideal. We want to move to that window of tolerance where you are better able to cope with stress. I know for many people here at the Royal Ag Society go through a royal show and come out the other side and said, oh, that was so good. They're exhausted, but they actually enjoy that level of heightened stress. So it can be a very positive thing. What we want to do is get to a point where you recognise in yourself if you're shutting down or if you're going the other way. You're running away or you're getting into that fight mode. So what we're aiming for is that window of tolerance. Sometimes people talk about breathing, and we go through that every year. We have either someone to come and talk to us, or we actually talk about mindfulness and breathing, and that level of physical activity, not necessarily relating to the show build, but what are you doing in your outside life to get that stress release? So physical activity, mindfulness, breathing, those things are really, really simple methods of helping us out when we're feeling stressed. We had an exercise maybe last year or the year before. We had someone come in and speak to us for free about healthy eating, about lots of water, staying hydrated, really simple things that we all know about. But what we did was commit to each other what we were going to do as we headed towards our busy time. And each person is very different in terms of how they manage things. So if someone shuts down and goes into that flight mode, it can lead them to being depressed, lethargic, or unmotivated. But if they're in that fight mode, they might be overreactive, they'll have unclear thoughts. None of these situations are good. So how do I, as an individual, or how do you as an individual manage those stresses and move it towards a more positive outcome? So what can we do for ourselves and others on an individual level? Ask, are you okay? We have our You OK Day every year, but create it as put some posters up, have some ideas around how you can work as a committee or as an organisation to have a venting buddy, share with someone you trust, check in on people, and not just a superficial how you're going. Actually have that meaningful conversation with someone. If you do notice stresses in someone, check in with them after the fact. So if they have raised their concerns, don't just help them sort it out and then walk away and never see them again. Regular check-ins after the fact. Feed forward is an interesting one because sometimes the way we behave under stress might be being critical to someone or saying this is wrong, this has never worked. What we're trying to say is move things forward and think of feed forward. Is there anything I can do to help make this work as well as possible? Or let's talk about what's getting in the way and let's get on top of it. So don't necessarily draw up the past, put a line in the sand and say, what can I do to help? And how can we make this not happen again? So make it future focused. So the new brain tends to engage and it's more optimistic and more focused on problem solving. Decide when you or others need professional assistance. I'm not a psychologist by any means, but I think from an HR perspective, we do need to think about our own mental health and about the mental health of others. I know some of you are from smaller organisations. It makes it very difficult, but some organisations in the ASA network have employee assistance programs whereby individuals can access support, but there are also a lot of other free support lines, and at the very least, having a couple of notes up around to say to people, you know, if you're having issues, here's some numbers for you to call. So have a look in your own state, but there are certainly some fantastic links and free services that people can go to when they're feeling stressed. Dare I say this, but as an organisation, I think you have a responsibility to do that, to be able to refer people to those the forums where skilled people and professionals are available to talk to people that are under stress. But think about what you can do at an individual level, and think about what you can do from a leadership point of view, whether a committee or an organisation leader. Types of reporting for psychosocial hazards. I think this is fairly straightforward. So reporting can be as simple as verbal discussions, emails or texts. I would highly recommend, no matter how small a show you are, that you have a hazard or incident report form. Bigger organisations will generally have a grievance or complaint policy or procedure. It is very simple to put something together, and I'd be willing to share with ASA to pass on, you know, a more complex grievance process. It's really allowing people options to raise concerns. It doesn't necessarily mean they're complaining about someone's behaviour, but we do, as from a workplace health and safety point of view, we do need to provide people with options. So where can they go if they have an issue? Don't just give them one choice. So the bigger the organisation, obviously the easier it is, but you might create a forum whereby people can go to anyone in your committee or a paid staff member. You give them options, and you do need to communicate that out. So whether people access it or not is another thing, but you do need to put that out there so that people have options to go to. Workers, volunteers or paid, need to know where to go. That's not a once in a 5-year, oh, let's roll out our policy, oh yes, that's available for people to look at if they need it. It is about a regular refresher. We do it at least twice a year, and then maybe quarterly we send people our employee assistance program links, online links where people can go and get assistance confidentially. So there are, as I said before, there are a lot of free services. Providing your volunteer network the opportunity to access those different options to assist them will assist you as an organisation going forward. If something's brought up and says that the organisation didn't do anything to support me, you're able to show that there's an email trail, that you've had some inductions where volunteers are given opportunities on how to manage a concern, a complaint, an issue. When we're all working in a physical environment, we've got 30 hectares, and some of you have massive showgrounds. There are things that can happen on showgrounds that you might not be aware of. So we do need to educate our workers in where to go if they have a problem. And that includes for serious psychosocial hazards like bullying, harassment, threats to safety, that there are escalation pathways, even out of hours. So being able to address those things, particularly when our workers are exposed to the general public, we can't always, or we certainly can't control how the general public act, but we can certainly provide support for our workers on where to go if they feel concerned or if they feel unsafe. So confidentiality is absolutely critical. So someone raises a concern with you, it's in their hands as to how what they want to do when you present them with options. But if their complaint or their issue raises a risk to someone's health and safety, you have an obligation to progress it. So we have had instances where people have felt they've raised an issue with a person of authority and that person hasn't raised it with the appropriate channels. So a very, very simple, here's where you go if you have a problem. And for your leadership group or your committee, if you receive an issue or you see a behaviour that's inappropriate, what is it that you do? We need to be fair and impartial. So I'll bring up a bullying example. One volunteer raises that they felt they were bullied by another volunteer. We don't just take one person's word. We do actually need to explore what's happened and find out what that first person wants to do about it. So what is the outcome they're seeking? It could be as simple as an apology, but if we just walk away and not deal with it, we're not following our obligations. And similarly, if we accuse someone of behaviour when we haven't explored it further, that's not right either. In terms of managing a complaint, we do need to give people updates, but you do need to think about confidentiality as well. So in the years that I've been an HR practitioner, there's certainly been times where a complaints process has been long and drawn out, but you do need to check back with the person that's raised the issue in the first place so that they know that it is being dealt with. Very simple messages here. What can we do in an organisational level that's fit for purpose? And I appreciate that it's time and resources, but this is an obligation that we have as officers of our organisation. Training and inducting staff and volunteers, non-negotiable. Whether that be in person, online, combination of both, written information. If you have the benefit of a volunteer management system, you can send information out and you can confirm that people have at least received it, is great. If you can have a record of attendance for any of your inductions, that's what you may be called on to show at a later stage. And it's not just you keep your records for a couple of months, you keep them for a long time. So someone could raise an issue 6 months on or even longer. We need to show that we've done our due diligence, that we have brought people along on the journey, that we've told people where they need to go if they have an issue, the key people that they can talk to if they have an issue, and the training may be different for staff and volunteers, but it might all be the same as well. It's about process and it's about where they go if they have an issue. It's also about what behaviours are expected. As an organisation like ours, we have numerous competition committees and other committees, and we need to track that those committees are aware of their responsibilities in terms of how they act, but also how others within their competitions behave. So we need to make sure that those people have received the right information, and it's a cascading approach. If you have an opportunity to do a site induction through a link or through some slides or through a pencil and paper version, it's having those things around behaviours and codes of conduct that are really, really important. And to get someone to say, yep, read and understood, or I'm walking on ground, this is how I'm going to behave. Or if you need to call on that information later, you have got a written name and address or signature and name of and the date of someone that's actually signed that they've received the induction. I cannot reiterate that enough. It's not about bombarding people, but it's about giving people the information so that they know what your expectations are of them, and vice versa, what they can do if they have an issue. So policies to support psychosocial safety might be everything from workplace discrimination and harassment policy to codes of conduct to, as I said before, site inductions. There are so many that we could use, but you need to think about how often do we disseminate these and how, what's the approach. Record keeping is probably the most important. From the risk management approach, that I showed you the circle graphic before, include consultation with your workers, which means volunteers as well. So when you're looking at your controls and measures and you're actually monitoring how things are going and evaluating, you do need to check in with those people to say what worked and what didn't. We must look at that consultation process as part of that wheel. So our review and monitoring and improvement is based on that consultation of what worked and what didn't. So you might talk to staff, you might talk to committee, but do spread that a little bit further and make sure you go beyond that. There are certain groups within our organisation that would say, yes, I'm fully aware of that, I know what we need to do, but there's no point if it hasn't cascaded through to the greater organisation. Monitoring and reporting. Ensure that your processes for reporting are clear and investigate where needed. So you need to be able to document how you've improved at things. Do look at your relevant codes of practice and other guides and monitor that psychosocial risk trend. So there's a lot of reading around the place within your own state, but across Australia as well, not when things become newsworthy, but seek advice for your state on areas of if there are trends and changes. And I think we're probably all in the same boat in terms of workload management and role clarity, whether paid or unpaid. They're things, I wouldn't even call them a trend, they're things that we need to look at year on year. Sometimes with the bigger organisations, you're looking at your paid staff positions, the workload that happens when you lose staff and people are sort of doubling up or have got extra work piled on. But the volunteer workforce is absolutely critical to not just expect people to work ridiculous hours. What is the support that you need to make sure that they don't have unnecessary fatigue or that they're not taking too much on themselves? I know that's probably a very sweeping statement, but I think we're probably all in that boat. Oh, I'm at the end. So I didn't even stop to see if there were any questions. Sorry, Katie, I probably should have done that. But I wondered if there's...
So Jane, there is a question from David Russell. The relationship between... Yes, sorry. The relationship between individuals with their either perceived or real power, so whether it's either perceived or real power, and staff members can be really complex. So often with committee members also volunteering at showtime. Do you have any suggestions or strategies to deal with, in particular, ongoing passive-aggressive comments to staff or volunteers in a very busy time?
Oh, David, that's a curly one. Thanks for that. Canning Show is one organisation that I've done this presentation in, and David will remember we did a bit of a case study about, or a scenario about committee members and volunteers working together. I think I will simplify this and say that the behaviours that we walk past are the behaviours that we allow. If we are aware that there is passive-aggressive commentary or behaviours towards staff or other volunteers, then they need to be pulled up. It might be as quick, even if you view that behaviour and the person on the receiving end doesn't appear to be concerned by it or says, oh, well, that's just Jane, that's just how she is. you have a responsibility as an officer to take that person aside and say, this is not in line with our values, or these behaviours are not in line with our expectations of you as a representative of our organisation. I think we all have a right to withdraw a volunteer's role within our societies or our ag shows. And I would really caution you on that we don't just excuse people's behaviour at a busy time. We've probably had 3 issues in the last 2 weeks. One from a competitor, I'll put it that way, exhibitor, competitor, and that behaviour has presented itself to us. We would have an escalation process for that. So a staff member, a volunteer, and a chief steward were involved, and we are addressing that. So that's just not, it's not acceptable. Real or perceived power is interesting. I think training is required. So a simple one, David, I'll come out to your committee and have another chat. More than happy to do that. But I think just even sharing these slides or a subgroup of these slides to say we have responsibilities. If you can relate it back to something that the workplace has, whether it be your vision, mission, values, they're the things that you need to draw on. And you need to talk about that person's role in leadership as well. So I think there's 2 things. One is addressing behaviour with that person. The other is to check on the other volunteers around, check in with them regularly, make sure they know that there's a complaints process if they feel unsafe in any way or feel that they've had a disrespectful engagement with somebody, that they have a safe place to go. So it's probably as simple as that. Thanks for the question, David.
So I do, good advice. He says, thank you, good advice, Jane. I do have another question, and I thought I might pose it to you, Jane, if that's all right. So if there were, how was I going to explain this? If there was one policy, a process or a conversation that every ag show should introduce before their next annual show to better manage that psychosocial risks, what would you recommend? If there was one policy or process or a conversation they should possibly have?
Unfortunately, I don't think it's one. It's a great question. I think a code of conduct is essential, and we have one for RASWA workers, which covers all those groups I talked about before, whether they be volunteers, staff, contractors. We issue that every year. We are in the process of looking at a more robust process that our committees receive that with their invitation to be part of a committee. But we've actually, it's so many prongs to this. So we've got a session coming up in a couple of weeks with our competition supervisors and the counsellors involved with competitions to reset around expectations and how they can support each other when they're out on ground. So I think there's ways of saying, well, here's the code, but what does it mean when we're over at Woodchop or we're stuck up at sheep and there's no one else around? So what can the council supporters and the competition supervisors do to make sure their volunteers are safe, that they're safe as well? I think that's really, really important, that this is just not a once-off. But yeah, the fundamental workplace discrimination, harassment, bullying, those sorts of things. But you can do that very simply with your volunteer and staff training. So just make sure there's at least a couple of slides around behaviours. And if you can link it back to something you have in the workplace, even better. But if you're just naming some standards of behaviour and expectations, get that attendance signed that those people have been present and capture those people that aren't present. So send them out that slide deck or whatever, your induction or whatever it is, to say these are our expectations. It's a multi-pronged approach. Thank you. It's
very good advice. It really is. And that can be scaled up and scaled down for our show societies for sure.
Absolutely.
Jane, I would very much like to thank you for your time today and your expertise. And there were some really great practical tips in this. I wanted to let Frank know, who put into the chat, yes, there will be a copy of the slides. We will email everybody who has been on this webinar today once Jane sort of fixed up her slides. She wants to take out some notes. It will also go onto the ASA website under resources directly after this, and I'll be posting something on socials. We have put up a quick poll. There's only three or four questions, because we would love to hear from you, how you liked it, what you want to see next. We do have some other webinars on the cards for the rest of this year. One is around the 5 stages of show experience. So what does that look like? And that is being run by Australian regional events. And I'm hoping to get a webinar up at the end of the year around grant writing and accessing grants and how do shows do that better. So Jane, you are a wealth of knowledge. You have helped me in my role a lot as well. So I very much thank you for your support, and thank you very much for your time today.
Thanks so much, Katie. And thank you everyone for dialing in. It would have been a bit awkward if it was just Katie and I and Heather. So thanks for taking the time.
That's true.
Thank you.
One last question from Carolyn is, can we add an example of code of conduct and grievance process, please, with this emoji from Carolyn?
No problem. I'll send that through to you, Katie, to disseminate.
Thank you very much. All right, everyone. Thank you for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.